Welcome to Paranormal United States, episode 38. We are in Pennsylvania.
We are indeed. And following on from many a tradition of previous ones, we're going to be talking around a penitentiary.
Cool.
So it's the Pennsylvania Eastern State Penitentiary, with its looming, gloomy, high stone walls, crumbling corridors, and stark cells that once housed thousands of hardcore criminals. The Eastern State Penitentiary definitely looks haunted. Its 142-year history is full of suicide, madness, disease, murder, and torture, making it easy to imagine that there's lots of troubled souls roaming around. And I know we've spoken before where we've said these kind of places where there's been trauma and that kind of thing, there always seems to be quite a lot of instances of hauntings based just on the fact that there's all this trauma. You'll hear me call it ESP, which is Eastern State Penitentiary, throughout this episode. But it became the model for more than 300 prisons worldwide. It's got massive grounds across 10.5 acres, which is pretty big. It cost $800,000 to build when it was brand new, which would be the equivalent of over £29 million today. So probably in the grand scheme of things, still not that expensive, considering it's like a super secure prison. But it does, yeah. What do you reckon? I mean, it's a lot of money, 29 million. But
so nowadays, like, things cost bloody millions straight away, don't they?
Yeah.
Nowadays.
Yeah. But I think that's still a fair amount. And it did house some famous inmates. Al Capone was one of the famous inmates.
Cool.
Capone served 8 months in ESP for a concealed weapons charge on his bodyguard, Frankie Rio. Capone, responsible for the famous St. Valentine's Day massacre, reportedly began being harassed by a supernatural being named Jimmy. Capone later revealed that Jimmy was James Clark, one of the victims of the infamous massacre. Prisoners reported hearing Capone's screams, apparently begging to be left alone. And this activity allegedly continued even after Capone was released and followed him until his death.
Wow.
So whether that was just a mental thing or not, so that's one of the famous inmates and also paranormally affected. Then we got Willie Sutton, was a famous bank robber. He tunneled his way out of ESP only to be rearrested minutes later. He spent all the time tunneling out. And then we've got James Bruno, aka Big Joe. After losing a series of key positions to rivals in a small town in Pennsylvania, he was like a politician. He attempted to fix ballot boxes as well and still lost. He and his family mowed down the opposition's victory parade in a rain of bullets in the 1934 Kelleries massacre. So he went to prison for that as well.
Can't take a loss.
No, that's bad and sour grapes, isn't it? That is for definite. The harsh punishments, though, used on prisoners are enough to make you shiver, even if you don't see a ghost there. Originally, the prison operated under the Pennsylvania system. This method of reform required strict and complete solitary confinement with no communication except religious study. And over the time, the guards and staff creatively supplemented these primary reforms with more outright torturous punishments. So there was a point where the prisoners were hooded. So prison guards couldn't identify them, and other prisoners could not identify them as well. So when they were released, it was still anonymous, so they didn't know who they were in prison with. And then as time got on, they allowed them cut out holes so they could see out of the hoods, but they still only could see out and nobody could see in. One of the other torturous punishments was called the water bath. Guards dunked inmates in icy water and hung them from a wall overnight whilst they were freezing. You had the mad chair, where they binded and restricted all movement for days at a time.
Wow.
Yeah, you had the iron gag. So guards shackled a prisoner's tongue to his raised wrists, which, if you relaxed, would tear the tongue.
Fuck.
Yeah. And the Klondike, a dark cavern dug out under cell block 14 where prisoners were starved for extended periods. So
Who even comes up with some of these ways of treating them?
horrible stuff, isn't it? Horrible stuff. Some sadistic guards. And this is the guards and staff creating these. This is not just the system.
Yeah.
So the prison, which closed in 1971, is considered by several sources to be one of the most haunted places in America, as do most of these places that we talk about. It's been featured on Ghost Adventures, Most Haunted Live, Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters, and MTV's program called Fear. Dozens of paranormal researchers visit every year and report that it's a hub of otherworldly activity. Perhaps most convincingly, there are stories of eerie experiences by visitors, staff, guards, and inmates that have corroborated each other since the 40s. So we've got cell block 12 is known for echoing voices and cackling. Cell block 6 is for shadowy figures darting along the walls. Cell block 4 for visions of ghostly faces. Many people have reported seeing a silhouette of a guard in one of the towers. They've got footsteps, wails, whispers, and the same stories are said over and over again by guests, previous inmates, guards, etc. So some visitors have reported the sound of laughter as well as the appearance of a shadowy figure roaming the upstairs hallways as well. So one of the most legendary tales comes from a chap called Gary Johnson, who helps maintain the crumbling prison. In the 90s, he had just opened an old lock in cell block 4 when he says a force gripped him so tightly that he was unable to move. He described a negative, horrible energy that exploded out of the cell. He said tormented faces appeared on the cell walls and that one form in particular beckoned to him. However, a tour guide for the prison, a guy called Ben Bookman, said that it's a lot harder to find a believer than it is to find a skeptic here. The Eastern State Penitentiary do not claim that the prison is haunted, but they do run a haunted attraction. Bookman says that the staff do not like to exploit the prison's darker image. Most people making TV shows come in looking for ghosts, and that's not the story they tell. Inmates were real people. These are real people's lives, and 70,000 people spent time there. And they don't want to glorify it, so they're not going to make fun of it. Which I get. Commonly reported occurrence is a sighting of a figure standing in one of the guard towers. Maybe it's a former guard. Many visitors and staff at the prison have reported hearing the sounds of footsteps down the long corridors and anguished wails coming from inside some of the cells. One particular spirit has been seen in the older part of the prison by many. He's said to be a shadowy form that stands perfectly still, sometimes completely unnoticed until approached, at which point he dashes away. One of the more notorious and controversial videos taken at Eastern State is one that appeared on sci-fi series Ghost Hunters, where members of the Atlantic Paranormal Society filmed what appears to be a shadowy figure on the catwalk of cell block 4. Pep, the dog, has been reported to be seen and heard throughout the prison. Pep was given free rein in life to go wherever he pleased, and thus is spotted in many different locations. Because at one point, the prisoners were allowed pets, and they were allowed to keep dogs.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, a part of the famed penitentiary is that they kept and maintained a death ledger. It was a book that kept track of all the deaths that had occurred within the walls, as well as the causes behind it. Over 1,000 entries were written into the death ledger, with the commonly stated cause of death being suicide by hanging and illnesses such as tuberculosis. During the 18th and 19th century, however, masturbation was listed on the death ledger as a cause of death for several inmates. That's pretty hardcore. Wank yourself to death.
What were they doing?
Well, I can explain what they were doing if you really want me to.
I think I've had that talk.
I mean, that must be going some to die via masturbation. I assume that was to themselves and not somebody else. I don't know.
That's weird.
So,
going at it hard.
This includes an inmate number 3477, an 18-year-old, fair enough, and inmate 4033, a 27-year-old. The unusual cause of death was prompted by the unfounded belief that masturbation would lead to certain illnesses and even death. Interesting. I mean, when I was 18, I probably did try masturbate myself to death, I imagine. I don't know.
I don't know what to make of that, though.
I don't know. So, of the 18, moving swiftly on, of the 18 cases of insanity listed in the 1838 report, 2/3 of it were thought to have been caused by excessive masturbation.
Oh.
So 2/3 of 18 cases is 12. It's 12 people. Not quite so paranormal, but
that's it's not. It's definitely not. Yeah, as it is.
Not normal.
It's not normal.
Abnormal, rather than paranormal.
It's
I'll leave you
weird
with that one. Yeah. Experts have also stated that ESP's system of isolating prisoners to solitary confinement may have contributed to mental instability and, in the worst cases, maniacal and suicidal outbreaks. That said, no inmates were ever executed under the system, in spite of the construction of death row in cell block 15. Cell block 15, more commonly known as death row, was the last cell block added to ESP and was used to house inmates who were on the death row. Nevertheless, no inmates were ever executed there, as all were sent to Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, the state's only death chamber, during the final days of their lives. So, slightly strange place. Unusual deaths at times.
Strange deaths.
The fact that they had these torture methods, people tried to escape, were caught. The death row that they never used for death row as such, not in that prison anyway. And one of the prisons that was modelled by 300 other prisons worldwide. So
must have thought it worked.
Yeah. And what with all the different cell blocks with the echoes of voices and whatnot, it seems a pretty strange place. And the more I was looking into this, the more I was thinking, this place is more of the wild ones of the penitentiaries that we speak about.
Yeah.
So that was episode 38, Haunted Pennsylvania.
I'm Googling.